I watched him hold my daughter and call her his little girl like he hadn't spent the last year trying to erase me from her life. His voice had that smug softness, the kind people use when they're showing off something they think they've stolen fair and square. He kissed the crown of her head, completely ignoring that I was standing 10 feet away, clutching a legal document that said everything he didn't want to believe. My name is Caleb, I'm 35 years old, and for 5 years I believed I was raising my biological daughter, Grace. Her mother, Tessa, and I broke things off when Grace was a few months old, but we agreed no matter what we'd co-parent peacefully. I thought we had something like mutual respect. I paid my support without fail, drove 4 hours every other weekend to see Grace, and kept a folder full of photos from our times together. Her first steps across my living room rug, her third birthday with cake smeared across both cheeks, her tearful descent down the slide I put together one Easter weekend. I loved her. I didn't know if I was doing it right every time I read the parenting books, signed up for the newsletters, asked my sister for advice, but I showed up. I was all in. Then the change started, slow at first, canceled weekends. Missed calls, Tessa calling with a sigh in her voice saying, Grace's schedule is just crazy now, or she's not feeling well, or sometimes nothing at all. I told myself it was just the rhythm of life, kids get busy. Parents get worn out, but it kept stacking up, the excuses, the silence, and suddenly I was that guy again, the one on the outside of the glass peeking in. What broke me wasn't any single missed visit. It was that strange knowing deep in the chest when the people you trust look you in the face and hand you a lie. It started with a letter, not from Tessa, from her attorney. Delivered to my apartment on a Thursday morning, folded and formal, announced by the mechanical thunk of the mail flap. Just seeing a legal envelope made my stomach knot up, but I opened it anyway because I had to. We have reason to believe you are not the biological father of Grace. That sentence, printed so coldly, no emotion, no context, just a declaration of doubt after 5 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and I love yous. At first I laughed flat, humorless. I figured it was a mistake, maybe an error in paperwork. But within a week I was sitting across from my lawyer as she read the DNA test results aloud. All markers are inconsistent with a biological parent-child relationship. Probability of paternity, 0%. I felt weightless, like the floor had been taken out and I was swimming in slow-motion silence. I kept staring at the report, reading the numbers, the jargon, the signature at the bottom that meant, supposedly, it was all true. My lawyer didn't meet my eyes when she said, we may want to consider options for a response. If this remains uncontested. Uncontested, what the hell was I supposed to contest? The numbers didn't lie, did they? But everything in me screamed wrong. Grace was my daughter. I'd held her in the hospital, watched her tiny fingers wrap around mine. I'd memorized the patterns in her hair, the way she scrunched her nose when she cried. 3 years ago, she'd fallen asleep on my chest with her hand still tangled in my shirt. You don't fake that. Still, the court didn't want sentiment. They had official documents and they moved with cold efficiency. One hearing later, I was slapped with an order, no contact until further notice. If I reached out, it was harassment. If I showed up uninvited, it was a violation. Tessa didn't say a word during that hearing. She just sat there, calm and polished, her new boyfriend beside her pretending like he belonged. When they left, he put his hand on her back, so proud of himself. I left court with nothing. No rights, no daughter, no acknowledgement that I'd ever meant anything to her at all. Back home, the silence in my apartment took on shape. Tangible, I kept looking over at her drawings still hanging on my fridge, the stuffed elephant she'd forgotten on her last visit. It was like grief, but no one died, just me, apparently. People say truth always comes out in the end, but what if the lie comes first and the damage is already done before you even get a chance to speak? That night, I lay in bed holding Grace's old baby sock like an idiot, as if it could answer any of the questions racing through my head. I didn't know what to believe. My lawyer told me to stand down. Friends didn't know what to say. Some pulled back, a couple told me maybe this was all for the best, but I knew better. I knew my daughter, and I couldn't let that go, not yet, not like this. Tessa had filed a petition to terminate my parental rights. Every syllable on that paperwork was like a knife to the gut. I knew she had been distant, evasive, colder by the month, but I hadn't expected this kind of finality. The filing included a DNA test report, neatly printed. Highlighted, clinical, it claimed I wasn't Grace's biological father. At first I laughed, a short, sharp, disbelieving sound that didn't stay in my throat the way I intended it to. I read and reread the document. The ink didn't change. Probability of paternity, 0%. I forwarded the report to my lawyer. She didn't laugh. "We should talk," she said on the phone. I drove 3 hours to her office because I needed to see her eyes when she said it. I needed to hear this from a human being, not from a string of PDF attachments and formal letters. She laid the page on the glass conference table, forming a triangle between us. Same document, different air. "I had it reviewed by a geneticist," she began, fingers tapping the corner of the paper. "Assuming this test followed proper protocols," she paused, "it's been accepted by the court." "So that's it?" I asked. My mouth was dry. 5 years of being her dad, and now I'm just voided. "I'm sorry, Caleb." "No legal path forward," she said. "Too risky to challenge without proof of fraud. If we contested on emotion alone, we could make things worse." But what she didn't understand, what no one really did, was that I wasn't going through some custody squabble or complicated breakup. I was mourning a daughter who was still alive, one who might someday not even remember I existed. I went home, sat in my car outside my apartment for hours, just staring at the dashboard. At some point I realized I was still clutching the folded test results in my lap, wrinkled now from the way my hand had tightened around them. My body felt leaden, like the air had thickened around me. I thought of Grace's first words, the way she dragged out "Daddy" like it was made of honey. I thought of the sandbox at the park by Tessa's old apartment, how she used to dig tunnels with a neon green shovel and call them rabbit roads. And yet legally, all of that now meant nothing. I called my parents, told them what the court said. My mother went quiet. Then we both cried, not soft, aching sobs, but the kind that break at the throat like something escaped when you weren't ready. My dad, always stone-faced when emotions rose, had one question: who signed that report? I didn't know. What hit me hardest, more than anything, was how fast people pulled away. Friends I used to invite over for cookouts when Grace was visiting stopped calling. A few sent me long messages, full of awkward sympathy, ending with some form of "let me know if you need anything." But none of them really knew what to say. Some flat out disappeared. One night, a guy I played softball with said something that stuck. We were having a drink. He looked sheepish, already halfway through a beer when he turned to me. "I mean, you seriously didn't know?" I didn't answer. I just stared at the foam bubbling around the neck of my bottle and thought about how quickly doubt spreads, like mold on bread. Even people who'd seen me with Grace, who'd watched her beam when I showed up at practices or brought her a pink snow cone from the stand, somehow now thought it was all pretend. Tessa made it easy. The moment the court granted her temporary full custody following the paternity challenge, she shut me out completely. Blocked my number. Emails went unanswered. When I tried to send a birthday card the next month, it was returned unopened, still sealed, with a bright red "refused return to sender" stamp that looked almost gleeful. The worst part, that stuffed elephant was still on my bookshelf. I couldn't put it in a box, couldn't throw it out. It was like witnessing a flame keep flickering after the gas has already been cut off. Every attempt I made to reach out became another bullet point in her lawyer's next filing: unwanted communication. Attempts to circumvent the no-contact order. The phrases felt less like legal concerns and more like poison seeping through any memory of kindness between us. I started having dreams where I'd see Grace across a mall or in a crowd. I'd shout her name and she'd turn, but it wouldn't be her face. It'd be someone else's child, wearing her clothes, speaking in her voice, but always walking away. Some mornings I stared at my reflection and almost didn't recognize myself. There was grief in my eyes, yes, but something else too: shame. I started to believe what the letter said. Maybe I wasn't her father, not by blood. Maybe I'd wasted 5 years believing in a role I was never supposed to fill. Maybe I was the fool in this story, and that thought more than anything else almost made me give up. Almost. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table long after the moon pushed through the blinds. The house was cold and quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock above the fridge. I should have been asleep. I hadn't really slept since the hearing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grace calling me daddy in that sing-song voice, tiny arms flung around my neck, demanding I watch her do another cartwheel. I'd open my eyes and remember, according to a court, she wasn't mine anymore. But somewhere that night, something shifted. I pushed aside the unopened mail on the table and spread out the DNA documentation again. Not my lawyer's copy. The original one that Tessa submitted, blurred print on cheap paper, her highlighter dragging across the words "probability of paternity." 0%. I hadn't really looked at it since the day I dissolved in her lawyer's waiting room. But this time, I did. I combed through each line slowly, dates, sample ID numbers, the testing company's logo tucked into the bottom right corner like a stamp of finality. That's when the first seed of doubt bloomed. The lab name, it didn't sound familiar. For all that I'd lost, I still remembered enough from our adoption prep classes back when we were together to know that court-accepted paternity tests had strict standards. Chain of custody forms, witness sign-offs. Every test had to follow federal accreditation guidelines if they were to hold up legally. This report didn't say anything about that. The logo was of a private testing firm, and when I Googled it, the website was sketchy. The address listed on the Contact Us page turned out to be a P.O. box near Tessa's town. Their FAQ was riddled with typos, and their About Us page listed no staff names, no certifications, nothing. I wasn't even sure if they had a physical lab. There was nothing official or clinical about it, no mention of AABB accreditation, which was required for legal DNA testing. It wasn't solid proof, but it was a crack, a starting point. I printed everything I could: screenshots, the company's non-existent accreditation, the fine print that said results were for informational purposes only. Then I pulled up Grace's kindergarten photos, the ones we'd taken by the pumpkin patch the fall before this all fell apart. Her cheeks, just like mine at that age, puffy with cold and wind and laughter. Her eyebrows curved like mine, just the same as my grandfather's in those war photos Mom liked to show off. I wasn't crazy. I would have known. By the next day, I was in my lawyer's office again. She looked at me with tired but patient eyes when I handed her the printouts. This lab isn't proper. It's not even allowed for cases like ours. There's no chain of custody, no verified witness signing off. Anyone could have mailed that swab in. Heck, Tessa's dog could have licked it clean. She took the copies and glanced through them, pausing at the company name, Harrington Genomics. I watched her eyebrows draw together. I've never had a case come across my desk using them. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Neither has anyone else, I bet. She didn't call me delusional. She didn't promise victory either. But she nodded and said, "Let me look into it." Days passed with the weight of molasses. During the wait, I went deeper. I requested a second opinion on the original test silently, carefully, without alerting anyone. Paid out of pocket for a report from a verified lab. Of course, they couldn't retest without fresh samples. The original ones were likely thrown out. But the analysis came back suggestive, wordy with caveats, sure but clear, in implying that while the results weren't fabricated, the lab itself was suspect. As one consultant put it, these results wouldn't stand in federal court with this paperwork. Still haunted by Grace's giggle echoing through hallways I no longer stepped foot in, I kept digging. That's when something strange popped up. While searching reviews of Harrington Genomics, I stumbled onto a local forum thread, people warning others not to use the lab. One comment stood out: had a bad experience, weird interactions. Go figure, I later found out my ex's cousin worked there. No surprise how our results turned out. That word cousin, I remembered Tessa's boyfriend, Derek, from the one time I'd met him. His brother had moved to their town a year back. Worked in health services, vaguely. I'd brushed it off at the time. Now I revisited everything. I found a LinkedIn profile, low activity but just enough breadcrumbs. Lab technician, Harrington Genomics. Specializes in sample processing. His last name, same as Derek's. I sat back in my chair like I'd been slapped. All of it began to spiral into place. Tessa shutting me out, the timing of the test, the casual way she'd claimed, like it was an afterthought, that Grace wasn't mine. It hadn't been a discovery, it had been arranged. I printed out the tech's profile, took screenshots of his connection to Derek, assembled everything into a file. If there was one thing I'd learned from being destroyed publicly, it was to fight the next round from the shadows. I called my lawyer. I want to petition for a new court-ordered paternity test, I said. This time, one that follows every protocol, real lab, real oversight, chain of custody airtight. There was a long silence, then the sound of her keyboard tapping. "Let's prepare," she said, and so I began, not as someone banging on courtroom doors wailing about fatherhood and betrayal, but as someone methodical, quiet, intentional, building something undeniable. Preparing not just to return but to reclaim, for Grace, for me, for the truth. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not my parents, not my closest friends. The fewer people who knew, the harder it would be for word to get back to Tessa. I started small. I combed through 5 years of co-parenting paperwork, visitation logs, email threads, bank statements showing child support. I highlighted any inconsistencies, not to argue feelings but to build a timeline grounded in fact. I pulled out dates when she canceled my visits last minute and cross-referenced them with my gasoline receipts and turnpike tolls. I gathered voicemails where I cheerfully said I'd see Grace soon, followed by emails from her lawyer claiming I had made no attempt to engage. I didn't try to frame it as mean-spirited or cruel. I just laid out what happened. I saved everything twice, organized in folders by category: communication, legal correspondence, original test, informal rebuttals, and finally, lab background. I gave them boring titles on purpose. No one should open one and immediately feel my rage burning through the screen. I also started journaling, but never emotionally, just facts. Attempted to call Tessa at 2:11 p.m., no answer, no callback. Received message from attorney with an updated hearing date. Downloaded PDF from lab accreditation registry. Harrington genomics not listed. Even how I felt got turned into sterile phrases: emotional impact, prolonged insomnia, appetite diminished, concentration affected. It wasn't for me. A judge might read it someday. When the court date arrived for my motion, I wore the same charcoal gray suit I'd worn the day I met Grace. Not for superstition, but to remind myself that I had not changed. That loving her, raising her, was never fake. We all present things for court differently. Some go emotional. I went surgical. Tessa showed up 15 minutes late. Derek didn't come inside, but I saw him loitering by her car, arms crossed like a nightclub bouncer. She sat 2 rows ahead and barely glanced in my direction. Her nails were bright red, manicured to the hilt. Her lawyer shuffled papers without urgency, confident the outcome was already theirs. My lawyer briefly summarized our motion. That the initial lab was not legally accredited, that the sample handling procedures were unverifiable, and that we requested a new court-ordered DNA test through an AABB-certified lab with strict chain of custody oversight. No emotion, just evidence. The judge, a salt-and-pepper man who spoke sharply and slowly, flipped through the file for longer than I was comfortable with. When he looked up, he peered at Tessa's attorney. "This is the lab you submitted results from." "Yes, Your Honor, we believed it sufficient at the time." "Did you verify their credentials against the required standards for family court DNA submissions?" A pause, a flick of the wrist. "We understood them to be in good standing." "Understood," the judge said flatly. He turned to my team. "And you're requesting not just a new test, but supervised collection through an approved facility?" "Yes, Your Honor. Chain of custody, independent oversight, and parental presence at the time of testing." He nodded. "Approved. The court authorizes a full DNA test under the following conditions." He went on to outline the lab scheduling method and that no additional parties could be present during collection except for medical staff and authorized observers. The date was set for 2 weeks from that morning. I didn't look at Tessa when the gavel tapped its final note. I didn't look at Derek either, who I glimpsed smoking near the side of the courthouse. I didn't need to. My eyes stayed on the parking pass I held in my hand. One step further. The morning of the test, I arrived 10 minutes early. The lab was clinical, stainless steel everything, with windows that reflected nothing but gray. I could see Grace in the waiting room window, her tiny sneakers kicking under the chair. A nurse spoke quietly to her, offering a sticker book. Tessa was there too, arms folded across her chest like a shield. She didn't speak to me, didn't look at me. I didn't speak to her either. We signed in, placed our IDs on the counter, and waited. Grace saw me. Her face lit up, not wildly, not like before, but soft and real. She mouthed, "Daddy," and waved. Tessa tugged her hand down. A tech guided me into a private room. Another came seconds later with Grace, who stared at the nurse, her eyes darting back to me. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered. Like she wasn't supposed to say it. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly, my voice catching for the first time that day. They swabbed us both. The procedure took less than 5 minutes. Samples sealed, paperwork signed. Watched, documented, signed again. Tessa walked out before we even finished. I heard the door close behind her with a startling finality. Back in the parking lot, my lawyer met me by her car. She didn't even have her briefcase, just one folder in her hand. 2 days ago," she said, "I got an anonymous submission mailed to the firm. No return address, but it contained the internal testing log from Harrington Genomics." My stomach dropped. "It shows a manual override on the sample linked to your case ID. Cross-referenced with another file that doesn't match your genetic signature. They wanted someone else's DNA in that report." She handed me the copy. Underlined in red ink, the initials of the technician who signed off. It matched the LinkedIn profile I had printed weeks before. It matched Derek's brother. I didn't say a word, just nodded once. The gears were turning now, quietly, firmly. And when the machine stopped spinning, there would be nowhere left for them to hide. When the courtroom doors opened, I stepped in like I was walking into fire. Calm, measured, already warm from the furnace I had been simmering in for months. My lawyer walked ahead, shoulders squared, clutching the folder that could rewrite the last year of my life. I held nothing. No notepad, no pen, only the tight fury sitting behind my ribs, pulsing with each breath like it knew what was coming. Tessa arrived 5 minutes later. She wore all white, a cream knit dress, hair blow-dried within an inch of softness. Her lawyer whispered something to her and she didn't nod or blink. Just stared straight ahead at the judge's bench like the walls might tumble if she acknowledged I still existed. Derek didn't show up. I didn't expect him to. We waited. The room was cold, but not because of the AC. The court clerk brought in a sealed envelope and handed it to the judge with a few hushed words. He cracked it open slowly, reading through the contents with a pace I resented. My palms were sweating, but I told myself to breathe through it. I had already lived through the worst day. This wasn't worse. This was justice rattling its coins before they spilled. The judge cleared his throat. No ceremony, no preamble. This matter returns to the court following a petition for clarification of paternity, pursuant to new evidence and testing results. His eyes turned sharp, steely across the half-moon of wood and papers that separated us. The court received results from an accredited AABB-certified laboratory verifying paternity. Tessa shifted, her nails dug into the edge of the table like she could grip truth and tear it apart. The judge continued. These results confirm with a probability exceeding 99.99% that the petitioner, Mr. Caleb Finch, is the biological father of the minor child, Grace Lynn Carter. The room stilled. I think my heartbeat stopped for 2 full seconds. My lawyer gave a quiet nod but otherwise kept her eyes on the judge's face. All I could do was listen, frozen, a mountain in its moment before collapse. I further note with deep concern that we have received supplementary evidence indicating material tampering with the prior DNA test submitted last year. This tampering appears to involve unauthorized sample substitution and may constitute fraud upon the court. Tessa's breath caught. It was subtle, a sound between a gasp and a sharp inhale. Her lawyer tried to interject. Your Honor, we had no prior knowledge of. But the judge shut it down fast. You will have time to submit a formal statement. But I am speaking now. His voice wasn't raised, but each word carried weight. Solid, final. Miss Carter, were you aware that the laboratory you used was not certified for legal custodial matters? Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Her lawyer placed a palm over hers. I didn't look at her. I looked only at the judge. Did you knowingly submit a result derived from a personal connection, one that lacked a legal chain of custody? No, she croaked out. But her eyes betrayed the word before her mouth even finished it. The judge raised one brow. Then can you explain how the technician who handled your test, who overrode internal data connected to your case ID, happens to share a last name with your current romantic partner? Silence. Thick and unnatural, like the court inhaled but refused to exhale again. Tessa's lawyer tried to intervene once more, asking to move discussion to chambers. The judge ignored it. Given the verified tampering and the false report submitted to this court, I am granting temporary custody to Mr. Finch effective immediately until a comprehensive review of this case can be completed. I let the words land, slow, deliberate, a gavel in my chest. Visitation was over, phone calls monitored. Now the road bent toward me. Court will pursue possible sanctions following separate proceedings, but today's ruling stands. Mr. Finch, your visitation rights are hereby reinstated in full alongside temporary residential custody of Grace Lynn Carter. I didn't react. No smile, no sigh, not even a shift in posture. Grace wasn't a prize, this wasn't victory, it was reclamation, it was breathing air that should have never been taken. Tessa stood abruptly, no words. Just rose, chest heaving, and walked out of the courtroom like it was burning behind her. Her heels struck every tile with venom. I heard the door slam. Her lawyer stayed behind. He packed slowly, carefully, as if delaying the inevitable barrage she'd unleash in the hallway. My lawyer touched my shoulder. You did it. You stayed measured. Judges remember that. I nodded, then slowly I exhaled. Outside, I saw Derek waiting next to Tessa's car. When she got to him, she yelled, not words, just raw noise. He didn't argue. He backed away. He dropped his keys. They were unraveling. Threads that took months to string together were snapping in all directions now. I turned away. Later that afternoon, as I folded the court's order into my coat pocket, the receptionist handed me a small envelope addressed in crayon. My full name, careful and big. I opened it in the elevator. Inside was a drawing. A crooked house, a dog that looked like a bear, two stick figures, one shorter than the other, both smiling with wild teeth. On top were 3 words. Me and Daddy. Grace walked into the apartment with a cautious shyness that hadn't been there when she used to barrel into my arms yelling my name. She eyed the couch like it was new, even though it had been here since before she could walk. Her little pink backpack thumped against her shoulders as she hovered near the door. I knelt down. "Hey, Bug," I said, offering my hand instead of a hug. She chewed her bottom lip for a second, then slung her arms around my neck so tight it knocked the wind from me. I didn't cry. Not until after she fell asleep that night on a pile of pillows too big for her. I just held her, whispered that I missed her, and let her story about school and her friend Anna fill the empty spaces inside me. She didn't mention Tessa, she didn't mention Derek. All she said before drifting off was, "I knew you'd come get me." We started slowly. Visitation days turned into overnight weekends. She adjusted easier than I expected, but still, the first time she called my place home, I had to excuse myself to the kitchen. I ran the faucet until my breath stopped shaking. Tessa missed 2 of her supervised visits that first month, then showed up late for the 3rd. When she did make it, she glared past Grace like she was just part of the wallpaper. I didn't engage. I brought books, juice packs, kept things light. Grace wasn't stupid, though. She asked after one visit why her mom didn't smile anymore. I told her sometimes grown-ups made mistakes that took a while to undo. She accepted that with the kind of grace only kids can manage. The court-appointed therapist said Grace adapted well, all things considered. She told me our bond seemed intact. Said sometimes the ones who truly love a child leave the deepest imprint. We kept building, evening routines, homework after grilled cheese, weekend walks through the park where she collected acorns and I pretended they were worth more than gold. The custody hearing came 3 months later. Tessa had changed lawyers by then. Her new one looked like a student barely out of law school, all eager glances and mumbled objections. My lawyer remained steady, pointed, but never cruel. They presented their case, argued that mistakes were made, yes, but that Tessa deserved another chance, deserved to keep her child in a shared arrangement. Her new statements painted me as overzealous and Tessa as tired, overwhelmed, but still loving. But the judge wasn't buying it. Not after the lab connection, not after the tampering, not after months of documentation of missing or canceled visitations. My files spoke in timelines and truth. The drawing Grace had done? That made it in, too. My lawyer called it inadmissible but telling. The judge smiled as he read it. Full custody was granted that same afternoon. Tessa's parental rights weren't terminated but were significantly restricted. Supervised visits, scheduled therapy. The judge said she was welcome to petition for more after a year of steady compliance. Tessa didn't look at me when the gavel dropped. She avoided Grace the next 3 visits. Then she stopped showing up altogether. After that, letters came instead. Court-mandated status reports, never personal. She didn't call, didn't write to Grace. I stopped waiting for that to change. And Derek, he was gone within weeks. Some mutual friend mentioned they'd split after a fight about the court case. He moved states, maybe married someone else. I didn't care. He had disappeared from both of our lives like a shadow fading at sunrise. Grace asked me once why he never came back. I caught my words before they fell carelessly. Maybe he wasn't ready for the kind of love you give, I told her. She looked confused, then nodded like that was enough, and maybe it was. Time moved forward, slow then fast. 1 year became 2. Grace turned 7 with a cake shaped like a unicorn, 8 with roller skates and scraped knees, 9 building forts in the living room with her cousins during a snowstorm. She never stopped calling me Dad, never got tired of riding on my shoulders or making me wear flower crowns from the backyard. I kept every drawing, every birthday card. Even ones where she spelled my name, Caleb, because she forgot how C sounded. I never corrected her, I just hung them on the fridge. Sometimes I think about those first silent nights after losing her, how small the apartment felt. How dark, and then I hear her laugh coming down the hallway and remember I'm not there anymore. They tried to cut me out, tried to erase me like a line on a chalkboard, but what they didn't understand is that love like this doesn't vanish. It roots itself, grows, makes whole forests. Truth has weight, so does love. I carried both. And in the end, they carried me back to her.